The story began in the quiet suburb where Daniel and Claire had built a life that, to outsiders, looked enviable. Their marriage had the appearance of stability: 2 children, a lovely house, weekends filled with laughter at barbecues and neighborhood gatherings. But beneath the facade of perfection lay a truth far darker, one that Daniel had begun to suspect long before he could prove it. Claire had always been charming, the kind of woman who could light up a room with her presence. People loved her, and Daniel, for years, was among them. He adored her wit, her smile, the way she seemed to bring color into his otherwise ordinary life. But in recent months, something had shifted. The late-night phone calls she dismissed as work-related, the sudden interest in her appearance, the constant excuses about working late, it all pieced together into a pattern that Daniel could no longer ignore. At first, he wanted to believe her. He wanted to tell himself that he was imagining things, that the woman he had devoted his life to could not possibly betray him. Yet deep inside, his instincts gnawed at him, whispering the truth he did not want to hear. He tried to confront her gently once, suggesting that perhaps she was too busy, that maybe they should reconnect, take a trip together. But she brushed him off, smiling that same rehearsed smile, assuring him everything was fine. Daniel was not a man given to rash decisions. He was methodical, the kind who thought 5 steps ahead before making his move. So instead of anger, he chose patience. He began to watch, to take mental notes of her behavior, her lies, the inconsistencies in her stories. Slowly, the picture became clearer, and with it came a grim resolve. If she was playing a game, then he would play it better. He quietly installed a small tracker in her car, hidden beneath the seat where she would never think to look. The first time he saw her location pinging at a hotel across town, his chest tightened with both fury and confirmation. It wasn't work meetings keeping her late, it was another man. But Daniel didn't act. He knew that confronting her with nothing but anger would only give her the advantage. Instead, he planned. Over the weeks, he gathered evidence. Bank statements, hotel receipts, text messages intercepted from a mirrored account he had secretly set up. He learned the man's name, Ethan, and even discovered that Claire had been planning a future with him, whispering in stolen moments that she was trapped in a loveless marriage and would leave her husband soon. Each word was a knife in Daniel's heart, but he endured, feeding his fury into a calculated strategy. The betrayal hurt, but what stung more was the deception, the ease with which Claire lied to his face. Every dinner they shared, every family outing, she played the role of dutiful wife, all while her heart belonged to another. But Daniel had decided, if she thought she could destroy him so easily, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Daniel began shifting their finances without her noticing. Accounts were moved, assets quietly secured under his name. He made sure the house, bought before the marriage, was solely protected. He consulted a lawyer discreetly, explaining the situation and laying out a plan that would leave Claire with nothing more than what the law demanded, and perhaps less, once her infidelity was revealed. He became an actor in his own life, pretending to be the oblivious husband while orchestrating the downfall of the woman who thought she had outsmarted him. The day of reckoning came quietly. He waited until Claire was away with Ethan. He knew exactly where they were, before gathering his children and dropping them off at his sister's house for the weekend. Then, with every piece of evidence meticulously organized, he confronted her not in anger, but with the cold precision of a man who had already won. When she walked through the door that Sunday evening, smiling faintly as if she had returned from errands, she found Daniel waiting at the table. He slid a folder across to her, and as she opened it, her face drained of color. Photographs, printouts of text messages, receipts, all laid bare. There was no denial left, no lie clever enough to undo the truth staring back at her. "I know everything, Claire," Daniel said quietly, his voice controlled but firm. "And I'm done pretending." For the first time, she stuttered. The confident, charming woman faltered, scrambling for excuses, apologies, anything to soften the blow. But Daniel had hardened his heart. He explained calmly that divorce papers were already drawn up, that custody of the children would remain with him, that her future with Ethan would not come with the comforts she had grown used to. She would leave with little more than her clothes and whatever dignity she could salvage. The beauty of Daniel's revenge was not in fury or violence. It was in his control. He had turned her lies into her undoing, leaving her shocked by the depth of his foresight. In the end, Claire had underestimated him, believing his love had made him weak. But Daniel's love had curdled into something stronger, sharper. He had been patient, calculating, and when the time came, he struck with precision. Claire's world crumbled in a single night. Ethan, once confronted with the reality of a woman who had been discarded and stripped of her stability, grew distant. The romance that had seemed thrilling under the cover of secrecy withered under the harsh light of truth. And Daniel, though scarred by betrayal, walked away not as the victim of infidelity, but as the man who had turned heartbreak into power. Love had blinded him once, lies had wounded him deeply, but revenge had restored his strength. And in the quiet that followed, Daniel finally understood. Sometimes the greatest justice comes not from rage, but from outsmarting those who believe you are too broken to fight back. After that night, when Claire's face turned pale at the evidence laid before her, Daniel thought the matter would end with a clean break. Papers signed, lives divided, and a wound left to heal. But as days passed, he realized something. Claire had not only betrayed him, she had humiliated him. She had lied so easily, lived two lives under the same roof, and made a fool of him without a trace of guilt. Walking away wasn't enough. For Daniel, revenge wasn't complete until she truly understood the weight of her betrayal. He began subtly. To the world, he played the role of the dignified man moving on, the wronged husband who kept his composure for the sake of the children. Friends and neighbors admired him, whispering in sympathy about how cruelly Claire had treated him. Meanwhile, Daniel quietly spread seeds of truth, just enough for people to see who she really was. He never raised his voice or accused her publicly, but whispers began to follow Claire everywhere she went. Her once flawless reputation, the image she prided herself on, began to crack. At work, Claire discovered that her business trips with Ethan had not gone unnoticed. Anonymous emails, carefully timed, reached her boss, hinting at conflicts of interest and improprieties. Meetings grew colder, opportunities vanished, and promotions she once considered hers slipped away. She suspected Daniel, but she could never prove it. That was his brilliance. He moved like a shadow, striking where it hurt most, yet leaving her without a single thread of evidence to hold against him. Ethan, too, began to falter. The man who had once promised her a dazzling future grew distant as her life unraveled. The romance that thrived on secrecy withered in reality. He saw her stress, her dwindling income, her reputation smeared, and suddenly she wasn't the woman he had been drawn to. Within months, he left her, offering vague excuses about needing time to think. The betrayal that she had inflicted on Daniel now came back to her tenfold, leaving her alone in the very place she had dreamed of building a new life. Daniel, however, thrived. With custody of the children, he became the stable parent, the anchor in their world. He poured his attention into them, ensuring they never felt the fracture as deeply as he had. Neighbors admired his strength, colleagues respected his resilience, and even his own family looked at him with renewed pride. The sympathy that once belonged to Claire was now entirely his. But Daniel wasn't done. Quietly, he ensured that Claire's financial ruin was complete. He had structured the divorce with such precision that she was left with little: no claim on the house, minimal alimony due to her affair, and debts she hadn't realized were piling up in her name. Every credit card, every loan she had signed under the illusion of comfort was suddenly her responsibility. She moved from their beautiful home into a small, worn apartment, far from the life of elegance she had once displayed so proudly. At night, Daniel would sit in silence, the weight of his choices pressing against him. He wasn't a cruel man by nature, but Claire had forced him into a corner. Love had made him blind, lies had made him cold, and revenge had sharpened him into something unrecognizable, even to himself. Yet there was a grim satisfaction in watching her unravel, not out of sheer spite, but because she had to feel what he had felt, powerless, deceived, abandoned. Months later, Claire tried to reach out. She called him, her voice softer, broken, asking if they could talk. But Daniel had nothing left to say. He listened in silence as she stumbled over apologies, as she begged to see the children more often, as she tried to rekindle even the smallest ember of the life she had destroyed. When she finished, he spoke only one sentence. "You taught me lies, Claire, but I taught you consequences." Then he hung up. From that day forward, Daniel lived not with bitterness, but with clarity. He had been wronged, yes, but he had taken control, turned the pain into something sharper than any blade. And Claire, once the woman who thought she had everything, spent her days haunted by the one man she had underestimated, the husband who had outsmarted her in the end. Daniel thought he had ended it with that final phone call, but the truth was, Claire's unraveling had only just begun. The divorce stripped her of wealth and reputation, Ethan abandoned her, and whispers about her betrayal spread through every corner of her social circle. But what broke her most was the silence. Daniel no longer fought her, no longer cursed her name. He simply erased her from his life, as if she no longer mattered. For someone who thrived on attention, that was the deepest cut. At first, she tried to fight back. She showed up unannounced at his house, demanding to see the children outside of the court schedule. Daniel never shouted. He simply documented everything. When she raised her voice, he stayed calm, recording her behavior. Within weeks, the court granted him even tighter control over custody. Claire's time with her children dwindled until it became an occasional visit supervised by others. The children, who once adored her, began to sense the truth. They saw through her broken promises, her erratic emotions, her bitterness. They grew closer to Daniel, trusting him as the steady presence she could never be. Claire's world shrank. The friends who had once admired her beauty and charm stopped answering her calls. Invitations dried up. Even her own family, disappointed by the disgrace she had brought upon herself, kept their distance. She was left alone in her small apartment, staring at peeling paint and stacks of unpaid bills, wondering how the life she once controlled had slipped so far away. Daniel, meanwhile, had begun to rebuild, not just his life, but himself. He became sharper, more confident. Women noticed him again, but he never rushed. He carried himself with quiet strength, and people gravitated toward him. Unlike Claire, who spiraled downward, Daniel rose from the ashes with an air of someone who had endured hell and come out stronger. Still, revenge is never without its shadows. There were nights Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering the woman Claire had once been before the lies. Part of him wondered if he had gone too far, if in dismantling her life, he had become something darker than he wanted to admit. But then he would remember the sting of betrayal, the photographs of her with Ethan, the smirk she wore when she thought he was blind. And he knew this wasn't cruelty. This was balance. Months turned into a year, and Claire was unrecognizable. She looked older, her spark gone, her laughter hollow. She tried once more to win Daniel back, not out of love, but out of desperation. She begged him to consider reconciliation, to remember the family they once were. Daniel met her eyes, and for a moment he almost pitied her. Almost. But then he thought of his children, of the years of lies, of the pain she had caused, and he knew mercy would only undo everything. "You had everything," he told her softly, "and you threw it away for nothing. I won't save you from yourself." He left her standing there, tears streaking down her face, her once perfect world reduced to dust. In time, Claire became a cautionary tale whispered among the people who once envied her. The beautiful wife who thought she could have it all, only to lose everything at the hands of the man she underestimated. And Daniel? He moved forward with his life, not as a broken man, not as a victim, but as someone who had learned that love without loyalty is a lie, and that betrayal, no matter how cleverly hidden, always has its price. For Claire, the punishment was not a single moment of pain, but the slow, unrelenting collapse of the life she had built on lies. For Daniel, revenge was not rage, but patience. And in that patience, he had destroyed her more completely than anger ever could.